It has been just over a year since Ghost Recon Wildlands released to what seemed like little fanfare. It came on the tail end of a raucous first quarter, including the renaissance of Resident Evil, the return of Guerrilla Studios, and of course, the launch of Nintendo's next console. That's not to mention the massive new Zelda that came with it. Toss in a smattering of indie darlings and successful AAA releases, and you have a landmark quarter across numerous genres. It's no wonder the newest Ghost Recon, the next in a long line of Tom Clancy shooters, claims so little real estate in the collective conversation. Nevertheless, Wildlands actually sold really well. It outperformed Zelda in the US, netting more overall revenue in their release month of March. It may not have dominated the spotlight like Breath of the Wild did, but it had a huge following. I compare these two titles because they release 4 days apart, but also because they both feature open-world structures. Zelda's fantasy trappings may clash with Ghost Recon's military aesthetic, but both stress exploration as a pillar of their design. Faced with a choice between these time-intensive games, I chose Zelda, granting me more time with my new Nintendo Switch and satisfying my thirst for a fresh take on Hyrule. But just recently, news of Ghost Recon's next major update, complete with Rainbow Six Siege cameos, piqued my interest. Knowing Ubisoft's penchant for post-release support, I jumped into Wildlands anticipating a host of changes, and they are definitely present. But in a wider sense, I'm discovering a variety of things I didn't fully appreciate a year ago when I first played Wildlands. How well the world facilitates stealth, for instance, or how subtly it transitions from one environment to the next, or how its parts coalesce to create one of my favorite cooperative experiences since Left 4 Dead 2. Don't get me wrong, there are massive flaws here. In fact, for everything I adore about Wildlands, I seem to find one more I can't stand. As someone with a long history of playing Tom Clancy titles and a longer history of playing shooters, this game has me conflicted. The way I see it, Wildlands represents both the best and worst aspects of Ubisoft's open-world games. And 1 year after Ghost Recon's release, both sides are all the more pronounced. If you haven't played Wildlands, here's the abbreviated plot. 4 US Army members drop into a Bolivia overtaken by the Mexican drug cartel known as Santa Blanca. If you speak basic Spanish, then you know how on the nose, or even in the nose, this name is.
So can we get some legal coca here for the altitude?
Your mission is to take down El Sueño, the head of Santa Blanca, and any underbosses standing in your way. All of this unfolds in a massive open world. Much has been said about Ubisoft's sandboxes, from the historical recreations of Assassin's Creed City to the cascading mission structure of the Far Cry franchise, but Wildlands' version of Bolivia is a fascinating marvel in its own right. Civilians exist only as window dressing, targets to avoid as you mow your way through the cartel. Villages serve more as stages for firefights than places I can actually imagine people gathering. There's also a general lack of combat variety that increases the more time you spend with the game. But viewed as a sandbox meant to encourage tactical stealth, Wildlands is almost unparalleled. Viewed from a distance, the game most closely resembles Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. The latter is the superior game in most regards, but there is a lot to learn from Ghost Recon's world. When clearing an enemy camp, you not only have to choose an angle of approach, but also how you'll escape in the aftermath. You can use your drone to scout a base before sneaking in for close quarters combat. If there's a machine jamming your drone, you can perch on a nearby cliff and scout the base from above. If you're extracting a cartel lieutenant, you can plan your exfiltration route through the surrounding marshes to a boat you left idling upriver that will soon take you to your hideout. This all works so well, and these scenarios pop up so often because of Wildlands' strong sense of geography. The world slowly changes from arid plateaus to mountainous farmland, snake-like canyons to vast, flat salt deserts. There is also an impressive sense of verticality as you descend sloping coca fields to escape a cartel outpost high up on a hill. Many of these thrills are amplified in co-op. I can spot enemies for 2 of my teammates, directing them through the alleyways and town squares below, while our 4th member circles in a chopper nearby, ready to pick us up at a moment's notice. Other times we would split into teams of 2. one to disable the power generator, the other to eliminate the cartel leader before slipping away under cover of darkness. The thing with Wildlands is that, despite my adoration for many of its aspects, I recommend it with major caveats. For one, Wildlands is much better on higher difficulties. It makes the world feel more dangerous, encourages stealth and evasion, and turns the game from a power fantasy into a survival scenario. If you're feeling particularly brave, play it on Ghost Mode, which institutes permadeath and resets all of your progress each time you die. Lastly, try to be stealthy. Ubisoft Paris designed Wildlands to allow for numerous approaches, and while that's great in theory, the game does not hold up in all-out combat. Shooting can be clunky, firefights become monotonous, and AI teammates, despite being vastly improved in the months since the game's release, aren't always reliable companions. I so strongly prefer a stealthy approach in Wildlands that I wish Ubisoft had focused solely on designing a stealth game. It feels as if half of the team wanted to make a GTA clone, allowing for hilarious mishaps and vehicle-based hijinks across the map. And to be clear, these options are present, but they feel more like an afterthought than an actual pillar of design. In many ways, Wildlands feels like two separate parts rather than one unified game. And this dichotomy pervades not only the gameplay, but the narrative as well. On the one hand, Wildlands is a cheesy action romp filled with cringy dialogue and NPC banter. On the other, it's a lukewarm examination of the war on drugs. If you've seen Clear and Present Danger or the more recent Sicario, you'll probably find Wildlands to be lacking in the narrative department. It attempts to tell a similar story to these films, but it stumbles by pulling punches when it could hit hard. It's also missing a self-awareness that makes, say, Rockstar's open worlds work so well. They find ways to rectify the overall storyline with the frequent chaos unfolding on screen. Now, I don't think every game about the war on drugs needs to say the same thing or to align with a certain worldview, especially in the case of Wildlands. It's a third-person shooter designed to be fun. It is designed to entertain. What's frustrating is that Ubisoft Paris so frequently hints at compelling topics, only to backtrack immediately afterward. Listen to this dialogue between Ghost Recon squad members.
The Bolivian economy was a wreck back then and people got into coca just to survive. Now it's a part of everyday life.
How the hell do you stop something like that?
Don't ask me. That's way above my pay grade.
Here's one more instance after I cleared out a pyrolusite mine, which the cartel used to refine the ingredients to make cocaine.
You know pyrolusite is used to filter water too.
There are other ways to manage that though, right?
Fuck it. I've been drinking bottled water anyway.
Both of these cases raise interesting questions. Can you ever stop the drug trade? Are you actually making things worse by being here? Ghost Recon's protagonists are dropped into a foreign country to follow the orders of a revenge-seeking CIA handler. Imagine if Wildlands explored that blind obedience. These operatives are doing their job, yes, but at what point does that job cross the line? In one cutscene I recently saw, and I actually don't want to show here, that same CIA operative forces a cartel boss to snort line after line of cocaine as a form of torture. She only allows him to stop once he gives her the information she's seeking. When put up against everything else you're doing in this game and the hilarious situations you often find yourself in, it just felt a little tone-deaf. In general, I think Wildlands would be much better if it allowed for player agency in the narrative. It often gives you freedom in how you explore the map, build your character, and clear enemy outposts, so why not extend that freedom into the story as well? Ghost Recon's boss fights are probably the best example of this inherent conflict. After gaining enough intel in each of Bolivia's provinces, you have the chance to kill, capture, or frame the local cartel boss. The problem is, you don't get to choose. You're forced into specific scenarios that fly in the face of the player choice you have up until that point. For example, I poured almost all of my skill points into stealth abilities, improving my drone's recon powers and making my character more silent overall. This build served me very well, as I almost always opted for stealth when I could. But then I came across a boss flying a heavily armed helicopter and could only complete the mission by shooting him out of the sky. My stealth upgrades were all but useless. To be fair, Wildlands gave me access to grenade launchers and light machine guns in the planning phase that would have made my job easier. But at the same time, the game was telling me my choice to be stealthy up until that point didn't mean as much anymore. Prior missions stressed player choice, but this boss and many others took that all away. I just wish that agency made its way into every corner of Wildlands' framework. What if Ubisoft designed a full-fledged faction system throughout the campaign? One that lets you choose between helping the rebels or the state-run military. What if you could choose how to deal with each cartel leader, rather than following the orders of an NPC across the map? Now, I realize this would spark numerous complications for the developers, and would be a much more difficult project to make. And not every game needs to be BioShock or Spec Ops: The Line in the way it makes you question your role as the player. But hear me out, Wildlands is set in a part of the world where the drug trade has played a large part in shaping the culture and economy for decades. This subject is ripe for exploration, and it's not one that you can half-ass, but in Wildlands, Ubisoft does exactly that. There's a gaping chasm between the complex stage Wildlands sets and the things it actually makes you do. I don't envy the team of writers that has to contextualize any open-world story. Telling your own plot while accounting for player freedom is a massive challenge. But recent titles such as The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn have shown that it can be done. They've shown that the open-world structure can serve to enhance the narrative, not clash with it. In returning to Ghost Recon Wildlands, I found a game that exemplifies my take on Ubisoft's open-world portfolio. The craft on display is unparalleled in its sense of place, but there is still a huge hole where the narrative should be. Games such as Far Cry 5 and Assassin's Creed Origins have crept a little closer to more meaningful open worlds, but the publisher still hasn't come close to its full potential. If Ubisoft could just take that extra step into complicated territory, it could make timeless pieces of entertainment. Games that are fun and nuanced. Games that give us more to talk about as the months roll by. I don't think it's a fluke that Wildlands came and went last year without much buzz. It released on the tail end of a crowded first quarter, but it also had an identity problem, and it still does. It feels torn between an all-out romp through a lukewarm world and a thrilling stealth game with an amazing sense of place. I only wish Ubisoft had carried through on its promise of player choice. I wish the team had stuck to a more refined vision than trying to appeal to every single player. There is a strong, intricate skeleton of a game here. It just needs a heart.